Rachel. We finally bit the bullet and built proper compost bins as we build out our suburban permaculture site. I've been gardening for years now, and I know that proper compost is amazing. It improves soil structure and nutrient availability. It holds 4 times its own weight in water. It adds beneficial microscopic soil life, and it avoids the landfilling of yard waste. It's also a ton of work to build, fill, and then later turn all of these bins. So I've been kind of avoiding it, and I've had mixed success with a few different experiments that were kind of composting light, and I wanted to share those results in case anybody would like to try some of those experiments before they go to full-on composting. I've had 1 disaster, 2 successes, and 1 early but looking good experiment. Moving back to our current place, the early stage but looking promising are those lasagna composting beds that I did a video on earlier in the spring. This is one of the beds after several heavy harvests. It's been really hot today, so these guys are getting a little wilty, but you can see in general really strong growth. The soil seems quite good, and I would say so far the sheet composting looks to have been a success. One earlier and definite success is what I call a can of worms. I had sod I had removed from my yard, and I layered that with layers of cardboard and packing paper, 1 version out in the open, 1 version inside a garbage can. A year later, I had living worms. I had much better texture, still some clumps of clay. You can see here a contrasting picture with a shovelful of compost. So it wasn't great compost, but it was definitely better than what I started with, and it was extremely easy and cheap. Success number 2 was what is in these bags. 1 year ago, I planted these kale in these bags, and I had a lot of extra wood chips left over from our chip drop order that we used to put the walkways into our garden. And I knew I couldn't plant into straight wood chips without locking up all of the available nitrogen. And so as I put the wood chips into these bags, I just tossed in some handfuls of blood meal to add a bunch of extra nitrogen. And I didn't really know if it would work, but I was using extra kale transplants and leftover free wood chips, so I figured what the heck. It's now, again, 1 year later. I've let these guys set flower. I will save seeds from them, but in the meantime, you can see, hopefully, if I dig down, this is kind of what we're left with now. So it's shockingly good. You can still see there's a couple little wood chip clumps in there, but I have grown things in here with just the wood chips and the blood meal, and I haven't needed to add any additional fertilizer to make it work. Not a practical approach if you were trying to do like a whole garden because blood meal's too expensive, but for small patio gardens like this, if you can access some wood chips, especially for free, and put in some blood meal, I would honestly say go for it. It worked surprisingly well. I'll take you back to our new permaculture site for my disaster, layer it and leave it. We had these huge piles of wood chips left over from clearing a bunch of invasive buckthorn and other kind of woody brush off of this lot. And what we did last year, as my husband was mowing, we layered it. We started with this technique, actually, so let me start with this, which was landscape fabric that we stapled to some vertical supports to create a ring, and we alternated layers of wood chips and grass clippings into that. And then those were, as you can kind of tell, those were not super structurally sound, so we switched to making a ring out of chicken wire and layering them in there instead. This is the result of that experiment, and you can tell, honestly, I probably should have just piled up the wood chips. The good news is the wood chips did start to break down and decompose, and I think they will now be easier to compost. But I shouldn't even have bothered to add the grass. You can tell, if I get this in the right here, this is just like a sheet of compacted grass clippings. They got weighted down between the wood chips. They didn't compost at all, and frankly, I shouldn't have bothered with the grass. So I think going forward, I would recommend just go ahead and pile up your wood chips and let them slowly decompose a little bit ahead of time, but don't bother with the grass clippings. This layer it and forget it technique just does not work. I'm happy to put in the work for these compost bins as we build out this site, but I'm also really happy that I did do those experiments. I think composting can seem really intimidating, but you know, great is the enemy of good. So if you have even halfway decent compost, you're doing better than if you had done nothing at all. I hope this is inspiring and makes this seem a little accessible to those that haven't tried composting before, and might kind of get you hooked into the composting world so that you can then eventually go all the way, maybe to big honking bins like these. I will give updates as we build out the site, but until then, hope this was useful, and thanks for watching.